The question nobody wants to ask. The scenario nobody wants to imagine. The possibility that keeps silver stackers awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if everything they have worked for could be taken away with the stroke of a pen. Will the government take your silver? For years, we have dismissed this concern as paranoia. We have told ourselves that it could never happen in modern America. We have reassured ourselves that the Constitution protects private property. We have believed that the government would never dare to confiscate the wealth of its citizens. We have been naive, we have been complacent, and we have been dangerously uninformed about what the government has already done, what it is legally empowered to do, and what the current trajectory of events suggests it might do again. Tonight, I am going to walk you through the history, the law, the economics, and the politics of precious metals confiscation. I am going to show you why the threat is more real today than at any point in the last 90 years. And I am going to give you specific strategies to protect yourself if the unthinkable becomes reality. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Silverstorm Daily, and this is the video that the government does not want you to see. This is the information that could determine whether you keep your wealth or lose it to a desperate and dying monetary system. Let me start with the history because those who do not understand history are condemned to repeat it. On April 5, 1933, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. This order made it illegal for American citizens to own gold. Not just gold coins, not just gold bars, all gold except for small amounts of jewelry and collector coins. Citizens were required to surrender their gold to the Federal Reserve banks by May the 1st. They would receive paper dollars in exchange at the official rate of $20.67 per ounce. Anyone who refused faced a fine of up to $10,000, which was a fortune in 1933, and imprisonment for up to 10 years. The government did not ask politely. The government did not negotiate. The government took the gold at gunpoint. This was not ancient history. This was less than a century ago. This happened in America, the land of the free, the home of constitutional protections, the nation that supposedly respected private property rights. The government confiscated the monetary wealth of its citizens to serve its own purposes. And it can do it again. Now, the apologists will tell you that 1933 was different. They will say that we were on the gold standard then, so the government needed the gold to back the currency. They will say that the economic emergency of the Great Depression justified extraordinary measures. They will say that modern America would never resort to such tactics. These apologists are either ignorant or lying. Let me explain why the conditions that led to the 1933 confiscation are repeating themselves today, and why silver is now the target. In 1933, the government confiscated gold because the dollar was backed by gold, and the government needed more gold to print more dollars. The Federal Reserve was constrained by the gold backing requirement. They could not create money out of thin air the way they do today, so they took the gold from the citizens, revalued it from $20 to $35 per ounce, and used the windfall to expand the money supply. The confiscation was not about protecting citizens, it was about enabling money printing. It was about allowing the government to spend more than it collected in taxes. It was about transferring wealth from private hands to public coffers. Today, the dollar is not backed by gold. The Federal Reserve can print unlimited quantities of money without any metallic constraint. So why would the government want your silver? The answer lies in understanding what precious metals represent in the current monetary crisis. Gold and silver are not just commodities. They are competitors to the dollar. They are alternative monetary systems that exist outside the control of the Federal Reserve. When citizens hold gold and silver, they are opting out of the fiat currency system. They are withdrawing their wealth from the banking system. They are refusing to participate in the controlled demolition of purchasing power that central bank money printing represents. The government cannot allow this exodus to continue. If enough people move their wealth into precious metals, the demand for dollars decreases. The velocity of money slows. The inflation that the government depends on to erode its debts becomes harder to create. The entire monetary control mechanism breaks down. This is why precious metals are a threat. Not because they back the currency, but because they offer an alternative to the currency. The government does not need your silver to print money. The government needs you to not have silver so that you remain dependent on the money they print. Confiscation is not about acquiring metal. Confiscation is about maintaining control. It is about closing the escape hatch. It is about trapping citizens in a burning building and preventing them from fleeing to safety. Let me walk you through the legal framework that makes confiscation not only possible, but disturbingly easy. The Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917 gives the president broad powers to regulate or prohibit transactions involving property in which any foreign country or national has any interest. This law was amended in 1933 specifically to enable gold confiscation. It remains on the books today. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 gives the president even broader powers during a declared national emergency. The president can investigate, regulate, or prohibit any transactions in foreign exchange, transfers of credit or payments between banking institutions, and the importing or exporting of currency or securities. This law has been used to impose sanctions, freeze assets, and restrict financial transactions. There is nothing in the text that would prevent its application to precious metals. Executive orders can be issued unilaterally by the president without congressional approval. Executive Order 6102 was never passed by Congress. It was simply decreed by the president under the emergency powers granted by existing legislation. A future president could issue a similar order tomorrow. There would be no debate. There would be no vote. There would only be compliance or prosecution. The legal infrastructure for confiscation is already in place. It is just waiting for the right crisis to trigger its activation. The skeptics will say that the courts would strike down any confiscation order. They will point to the Fifth Amendment, which says that private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. But this argument fails on multiple levels. First, the government would argue that paying the official price for your silver constitutes just compensation, even if that price is far below the market price. In 1933, citizens received $20.67 per ounce for gold that was immediately revalued to $35. The government stole 40% of their wealth and called it compensation. The courts upheld this. Second, in a declared national emergency, the courts have historically deferred to the executive branch. Judges are reluctant to second-guess the president during a crisis. They will find ways to interpret the Constitution that allow the emergency measures to proceed. Third, even if the courts eventually ruled a confiscation order unconstitutional, that ruling would come years after the order was issued. By then, the damage would be done. Your silver would be in government hands. You would be holding a paper claim that might or might not be honored. The legal process is too slow to protect you from executive action. Now let me explain why silver specifically is at risk. Gold confiscation in 1933 was straightforward because gold was officially money. The government maintained a fixed price for gold and used gold to settle international accounts. But the 1933 order did not confiscate silver. Silver coins continued to circulate. Silver remained in private hands. This has led many stackers to assume that silver is somehow safer from confiscation than gold. This assumption is dangerously wrong. The reason silver was not confiscated in 1933 was not because the government respected silver owners. It was because silver was not perceived as a threat at that time. Silver was an industrial metal used in photography and electronics. Its monetary role had been diminished. The government did not see silver holders as people opting out of the system. They saw them as collectors and industrials. That perception has changed. Silver today is recognized as both an industrial metal and a monetary metal. The silver stacking community has grown to millions of people worldwide. The premiums on physical silver indicate a movement of capital out of the banking system and into hard assets. The government sees this movement. The central banks see this movement. They track the sales data from the mints. They monitor the dealer volumes. They know exactly how much metal is being accumulated by private citizens, and they are concerned. Consider the strategic importance of silver in the modern economy. Silver is essential for solar panels. It is essential for electric vehicles. It is essential for electronics. It is essential for medical devices. It is essential for military applications. The government has a national security interest in controlling the silver supply. In a declared emergency, the government could invoke the Defense Production Act to commandeer silver for strategic purposes. They would frame it not as confiscation, but as requisition. They would say it is necessary for national defense. They would wrap the taking in patriotic language while stripping you of your property. The Defense Production Act of 1950 gives the president sweeping powers to prioritize and allocate resources for national defense. The president can require businesses to accept government contracts and prioritize those contracts over private orders. The president can allocate materials and facilities in ways deemed necessary for national defense. This law was invoked during the pandemic to prioritize production of medical supplies. It could easily be invoked to prioritize production of silver for strategic applications, and once invoked, the path from prioritization to requisition to confiscation is a short one. Let me give you the specific warning signs that would precede a confiscation event. These are the indicators you need to watch. If you see these signs, you need to act immediately because the window will close quickly. The first warning sign is mandatory registration. Before the government can confiscate your silver, it needs to know where the silver is. A registration requirement, framed as a national inventory or a strategic resource survey, would require dealers and possibly individuals to report their holdings. This registration would create the database that enables enforcement. Once they know who has silver and how much, they can send the agents to collect it. If you see any proposal for precious metals registration, whether from Congress, the Treasury, or the executive branch, understand it for what it is. It is the precursor to confiscation. The second warning sign is capital controls. Before a confiscation, the government needs to prevent people from moving their metals out of the country. Capital controls would restrict the export of precious metals and require reporting of large transactions. They might be framed as anti-money laundering measures or national security requirements, but the effect would be to trap the metals inside the borders where they can be collected. If you see restrictions on traveling with precious metals, new reporting requirements for purchases and sales, or prohibitions on exporting metals, understand that the net is closing. The third warning sign is cash restrictions. The government hates cash because cash is anonymous. You can buy silver with cash and leave no paper trail. But if the government eliminates high-denomination bills, imposes limits on cash transactions, or moves toward a central bank digital currency, they are closing the anonymous purchase option. A CBDC would allow the government to track every transaction, including every precious metals purchase. They would know exactly who bought what and when. The anonymity that currently protects some silver holders would evaporate. The fourth warning sign is demonization. Before the government takes an unpopular action, it prepares the public with propaganda. We would see media stories about silver hoarders driving up prices and hurting industry. We would see economists explaining that silver ownership is unpatriotic. We would see politicians denouncing stackers as speculators and profiteers. The narrative would shift silver owners from prudent savers to selfish villains. This demonization creates the public support necessary for confiscation. If you see the media turning against precious metals owners, understand that the propaganda is preparing the ground. The fifth warning sign is emergency declarations. Confiscation requires a legal basis, and that basis is almost always an emergency. A financial crisis, a banking collapse, a currency crisis, a war, a pandemic. Any of these could trigger the emergency powers that enable confiscation. We are living in an era of permanent emergency. The president can declare a national emergency with minimal justification. Once declared, the emergency powers flow automatically. If you see an emergency declared that has any connection to finance, currency, or critical materials, understand that the legal basis for confiscation has been activated. All 5 of these warning signs are present or developing right now. We have seen proposals for transaction reporting that would create de facto registration. We have seen increasing pressure on cash transactions and movement toward digital currencies. We have seen media narratives that question the motives of precious metals investors. We have seen emergency declarations that remain in effect years after the triggering event. The infrastructure is being built. The precedents are being established. The only missing piece is the trigger event that makes confiscation politically viable. Let me tell you what that trigger event might look like. The most likely scenario is a dollar crisis combined with a precious metals price spike. Imagine that silver reaches $200 per ounce while the dollar is collapsing on international markets. The government would face a choice: allow citizens to preserve their wealth in silver while the dollar burns, or confiscate the silver to prevent the visible repudiation of the currency. The government would choose confiscation. They would frame it as a temporary emergency measure to stabilize the currency. They would promise to return the metal once the crisis passes. They would never return it. Another scenario is a supply crisis for strategic materials. If the silver shortage becomes acute enough that industrial production is threatened, the government could invoke national security powers to requisition private silver. They would say that solar panel production is essential for energy independence. They would say that electronics manufacturing is essential for national defense. They would say that private hoarding cannot be allowed to threaten strategic industries. The stackers would be portrayed as enemies of progress, as obstacles to the green transition, as selfish hoarders who care more about their portfolios than their country. The confiscation would be wrapped in environmental and patriotic language that makes opposition seem unthinkable. A third scenario is a financial system collapse that requires a monetary reset. If the banking system fails catastrophically, the government might propose a new currency backed by precious metals. To launch this new currency, they would need to acquire a metal stockpile. Where would they get it? From the citizens who had the foresight to own metals before the collapse. The confiscation would be framed as participation in the new system. You would surrender your silver and receive credits in the new currency. The exchange rate would be set by the government, not by the market. You would be forced to participate in a reset that transfers your wealth to the state. Now let me explain why confiscation might fail even if the government attempts it, because understanding the obstacles to confiscation is just as important as understanding the threat. The government's ability to confiscate depends on its ability to locate and seize the metal. In 1933, most gold was held in bank-safe deposit boxes or with known dealers. The government could apply pressure to these institutions and recover most of the gold. Today, the situation is different. Physical silver is widely dispersed. It is in home safes, in buried caches, in private vaults, in overseas storage facilities. The government cannot easily locate all of this metal. They would depend on voluntary compliance, and voluntary compliance would be limited. The silver community is prepared. Unlike the gold owners of 1933 who were caught by surprise, today's stackers have been warned for years about confiscation risk. Many have taken steps to protect their holdings. They have diversified storage locations, they have moved metal overseas, they have established structures that provide legal protection. They have planned for exactly this scenario. The government would face organized resistance, not passive compliance. The political cost would be enormous. In 1933, precious metals ownership was concentrated among the wealthy. The average American did not own gold. Confiscation affected a small minority who had limited political power. Today, precious metals ownership is widespread. Millions of Americans own gold and silver. Many of them are politically active. They vote, they organize, they are vocal on social media. A confiscation order would trigger a political backlash that could threaten the administration that issued it. The government would have to weigh the benefits of confiscation against the political cost, and the cost might be too high. The enforcement would be impossible. The government does not have the resources to search every home in America for silver. They would depend on voluntary compliance backed by threats of prosecution. But prosecution requires evidence. If you simply deny owning silver, how does the government prove otherwise? The paper trail for many purchases is minimal or non-existent. Cash transactions at coin shows leave no record. Inherited metals were never registered. The enforcement gap would be enormous. The black market would explode. Prohibition does not eliminate demand. It merely drives demand underground. A confiscation order would create a thriving black market for precious metals. The premium over the official confiscation price would be astronomical. People who retained their metals would be able to sell them privately at multiples of the government price. The confiscation would enrich those who defied it and impoverish those who complied. This dynamic would encourage non-compliance. The international arbitrage would undermine enforcement. Even if the U.S. confiscated silver, the rest of the world would not. Silver would still trade freely in Singapore, Switzerland, Dubai, Hong Kong. Americans with overseas contacts could sell their silver internationally and repatriate the proceeds. The government would have to impose complete capital controls to prevent this, and complete capital controls are difficult to enforce in the modern economy. Despite these obstacles, I do not want you to be complacent. The government might attempt confiscation even if it cannot succeed completely. A partial confiscation, where they recover some metal from compliant citizens and institutions, might still be attractive to a desperate government. The compliant would lose their wealth. The non-compliant would keep theirs. The outcome would be unjust, but the government might accept an unjust outcome if the alternative is losing control entirely. So what should you do to protect yourself? Let me give you specific strategies that reduce your confiscation risk while maintaining your exposure to precious metals. First, diversify your storage locations. Do not keep all of your silver in one place. A home safe is convenient but vulnerable. A bank-safe deposit box is secure but known to the government and potentially subject to seizure. Consider multiple locations including private vaults, buried caches, and overseas storage. The more dispersed your holdings, the harder they are to confiscate completely. Second, consider overseas storage. Several countries have strong traditions of financial privacy and property rights: Singapore, Switzerland, the Cayman Islands. These jurisdictions offer allocated storage facilities where your metal is held in your name, segregated from other holdings, and protected by local law. A confiscation order from the U.S. government would not automatically apply in these jurisdictions. You would have time to respond, to relocate your metal, or to sell it before the order could be enforced internationally. Overseas storage is not a guarantee of protection, but it adds a layer of difficulty that might deter or delay confiscation. Third, consider constitutional silver. In 1933, the gold confiscation order exempted rare and unusual coins with recognized special value to collectors. This exemption was designed to avoid the political backlash from the numismatic community. Some legal scholars argue that similar exemptions would apply in a future confiscation, protecting collector coins and rare pieces. While I would not rely entirely on this exemption, holding some of your silver in collectible form rather than bullion form provides a potential legal defense. Fourth, maintain operational security. Do not broadcast your silver holdings on social media. Do not discuss your stack with casual acquaintances. Do not use traceable payment methods for purchases when alternatives are available. The less the government knows about your holdings, the harder they are to confiscate. In the event of a confiscation order, you want to be invisible. You do not want to be on any list. You do not want to be a target. Fifth, consider the corporate veil. Holding precious metals through a corporation, trust, or other legal entity may provide some protection. The confiscation order might apply to individuals, but not to corporations. Or it might apply to domestic entities, but not to foreign entities. By holding your metals through a properly structured entity, you create legal separation between yourself and the metal. This separation might not survive a determined government attack, but it adds complexity that could buy you time. Sixth, diversify across asset classes. Silver is valuable, but it is not the only real asset. Land, productive businesses, foreign currencies, cryptocurrencies. Each of these has different confiscation risks. A government that confiscates silver might not confiscate land. A government that freezes domestic bank accounts might not be able to reach foreign accounts. By diversifying across asset classes and jurisdictions, you reduce the risk that any single government action wipes out your wealth. Seventh, stay informed and stay connected. The silver community is a network of people who are watching for exactly these threats. We share information. We analyze government actions. We warn each other when danger approaches. By staying connected to this community, you will receive early warning of any confiscation threat. You will have time to react while others are still asleep. This video is part of that warning system. Share it with others who need to hear it. Let me address the moral dimension of this issue because it matters. Some people believe that if the government orders confiscation, citizens have a moral obligation to comply. They argue that we live in a democracy, that we accept the authority of our elected representatives, and that we must obey even laws we disagree with. I reject this argument completely. The government does not have the moral authority to steal your property. A law that violates natural rights is not a valid law. It is an act of tyranny dressed in legal language. The Declaration of Independence recognized that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. I do not consent to confiscation. You do not consent to confiscation. The silver community does not consent to confiscation. We have every moral right to protect our property from theft, regardless of whether the thief wears a badge or carries a warrant. The practical reality is that unjust laws are routinely defied. Prohibition did not stop drinking. The war on drugs did not stop drug use. A confiscation order would not stop silver ownership. It would merely drive that ownership underground. The question is not whether people would comply. The question is whether you would comply. And I would suggest that compliance with theft is not a virtue. It is a surrender of your rights and your dignity. You have spent years working, saving, and investing to build your silver position. You have done nothing wrong. You have violated no one's rights. You have simply chosen to store your wealth in a form that the government cannot easily debase. That choice is your right. Defending that choice is your duty. Now let me give you the reasons for optimism. Despite everything I have said about the confiscation threat, I do not believe confiscation is inevitable. There are powerful forces working against it. The political coalition protecting precious metals is stronger than ever. The sound money movement has grown from a fringe concern to a mainstream political position. Several states have passed laws recognizing gold and silver as legal tender. Politicians are proposing legislation to exempt precious metals from capital gains taxes. The idea that citizens have a right to own monetary metals is gaining traction across the political spectrum. A confiscation order would face immediate legal challenges and political opposition that might succeed in blocking it. The international monetary system is fragmenting. The U.S. dollar's dominance is declining. Other nations are building alternative payment systems and accumulating gold reserves. In this environment, a confiscation order by the U.S. would accelerate the flight from the dollar. Other nations would welcome Americans who want to store their metals overseas. The confiscation would backfire by driving capital out of the country and undermining confidence in the dollar. The technology for protecting wealth is advancing. Cryptocurrencies, decentralized finance, encrypted communications. These tools make it harder for governments to locate and seize private wealth. The same technology that enables tax evasion and money laundering which I am not endorsing, also enables legitimate asset protection. The government's surveillance capabilities are impressive, but they are not omniscient. Determined individuals can still protect their wealth if they are willing to take the necessary steps. The window for action is still open. Unlike 1933, when the confiscation order came as a surprise, today's precious metals owners have been warned. We have time to prepare. We have strategies to implement. We have options that the gold owners of 1933 did not have. Use this time wisely. Do not assume that because confiscation has not happened yet, it will never happen. Do not assume that because the government has not acted, it will not act. Prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Let me close with a direct message to everyone who owns silver or is considering owning silver. The confiscation threat is real. It is not paranoia. It is not conspiracy theory. It is based on historical precedent, current law, and observable government behavior. The government has confiscated precious metals before. The legal powers to do it again exist. The economic conditions that would motivate confiscation are developing. The warning signs are present. You need to take this threat seriously. But the confiscation threat should not stop you from owning silver. The risks of not owning silver are greater than the risks of owning it. The fiat currency system is collapsing. The purchasing power of your savings is being deliberately destroyed. The banking system is fragile. The counterparty risks in the paper financial system are enormous. Silver is protection against all of these risks. The confiscation risk is just one more factor to manage, not a reason to abandon your position. Take the steps I have outlined to reduce your confiscation exposure. Diversify storage. Consider overseas options. Maintain operational security. Stay informed, but continue to stack. Continue to accumulate. Continue to build your position in real money that has outlasted every government and every fiat currency in human history. Silver has been money for 5,000 years. It will be money for 5,000 more. The governments that threaten it are temporary. The metal is permanent. The current crisis will pass. The monetary system will reset. The debts will be resolved, one way or another. When the dust settles, those who hold real assets will be the foundation of the new economy. Those who trusted the paper promises will have nothing. The question is which group you will be in. The answer depends on the choices you make today. This has been Silverstorm Daily. Will the government take your silver? They might try. They have the legal power. They have the historical precedent. They have the motivation. But whether they succeed depends on you. Your preparation, your vigilance, your determination to protect what is yours. The government is powerful, but the government is not all-powerful. A prepared and informed citizenry is more powerful than any executive order. Be prepared, be informed, be determined, and never surrender your silver to those who would steal it. Like, subscribe, and share this video with everyone who needs to understand the stakes. The storm is coming. But those who prepared will weather it. See you in the next report.